Rivka, and I'm happy to have you in my home here in Caesarea, which, as you can see from in the back of me, is just in front of a Roman aqueduct, 2,000 years old. In the 80s, I started Sotheby's office in Israel, and since then got very involved in understanding the artist and the art created in Israel. Israeli art actually started at 1906 when Boris Schatz opened the first art school in Israel, Bezalel. Before, there was very little art done locally, some crafts, but very little. He came with the idea that he presented into the Third Zionist Congress, saying that if you want to establish a state, you can't start a state without having artists, artisans, and people that will create a place that will have a reason and a rhyme also from its aesthetic point and historical point. It was only in 1948, after the establishment of the State of Israel, that a whole group of artists started a group called New Horizon. They basically put up a manifest saying that now that the state is established, they can move and start to express themselves. And that's where we start seeing a lot of the artists moving away from figurative art, moving into abstract art, and then later to the new and more avant-garde trends of art. Our collection actually starts from the New Horizon group. The works are from the mid to the late 60s until today. This work is by Yehezkel Streichman, one of the three major artists of New Horizons. It is a monochromatic painting in its blues and light blues, but actually derives from a series of works that Streichman did depicting landscapes and mountain landscapes near Jerusalem. If you look at the background, it's actually coming from colors of sand into the light and the sky. So this abstract painting of lyrical abstract that Streichman did in the 60s is similar to artists around the world that were doing at the same time lyrical abstraction in the United States or in Paris or other places in Europe. After the New Horizons group, later in the 60s, a whole group of young artists led by Levin, who did this work, created a group called 10 Plus in 1965. And this group actually rebelled against the New Horizon. They felt that the artists of New Horizon were really the canon of the country, were part of the scene in the museums and in the galleries, and that the young artists could not find their place. So Levin started a new group, which the idea was really to enable younger artists to show their work using new materials, very much relating again to things that happened in Europe, but we're very much part of the local scene. It's similar to the arte povera in Italy by using a very simple and local materials of the wood. This work resembles, I think, the saddest day in the history of contemporary Israel. It is the assassination of Rabin. The red dots, which are blood dots of the shots, and I have to say that I put it into the entrance of the house because I think this changed the story of this place. Growing up here as a child to Holocaust survivor, I never believed that there could be a Jewish person killing the Israeli Prime Minister. So here in the bedroom we have works only by women artists. This work is by Michal Rovner. She deals a lot with showing how people move around the world, and actually they are almost symbolizing the way the letters move in the page or what we create. And The question is, how influential is this single figure in the totality? But when it becomes a whole group of people, it always creates a lot of movement and interest. I especially love this work because if you look at the view from the window, it's almost reveals a daily scene that we have here of people walking over the aqueduct, and I love to have this work here. This work is by Yehudit Levin, another Israeli artist that is today probably around 70 years old. This actually follows, again, trends that we see in other places in the world. At the time that the artist was very much using something called body work and integrated some blood into the paint she was using and created this image which is very much about togetherness. For me, it has a strong feeling of love and togetherness. This work is site-specific here for this room, made by Izhar Patkin. He's an artist that lives in New York already since the 80s. His work is part of the major museum collections. His work is at the Guggenheim, the Whitney, MoMA, and many other museums in the United States and other places around the world, and the Jewish Museum, including quite a lot of work. And he invented, I would say, a big printing machine that works in his studio and actually sprays color over these veils. And the fact that this veil is layered actually creates the idea or the feeling that there is movement behind the wall. But the scene is the beach here in Caesarea with a dog fight right here, or play, or whatever it is in front. And then in the right far corner, there is a mentioning or an image that comes from Altalena. Again, kind of look into historical and meaningful moments. The artists and the art many times tells the story of the artist or his sources or his roots. This work is by Philip Rantzer, who came to Israel as a young child in the late 50s. And he was for many years the head of the art program at Haifa University. He does these different installations, again, derived from found material and found object, but create always a story or an image that tells a story. When you listen to the music here, it is actually gypsy music from Romania. And when he arrived to Israel with his father, and until probably the 90s, most of the grocery shops in Israel were very small shops, and there were very few big supermarkets, or like what we know today, that you go shopping, you go into the supermarket. Hardly very few people buy in these small grocery stores that are still left around. Every time the new immigration takes over these little grocery shops. So next to Philip's studio, there was one of these grocery shops with a Romanian guy that he was the last person that Philip used to speak Romanian to. And then one day, Philip comes into to buy some milk in the grocery shop, and there stands the Ethiopian guy that just moved to Israel, because these places are always taken by new immigrants. And he again kept the pencil behind his ear. The pencil is a reminiscence for the period that the shopkeeper used to write everything that you take, and the people that bought the stuff actually came once a week or once a month, whenever they had the money, to pay for their purchases. So this is kind of a full story. This work is by Yehudit Sasportass, another important Israeli artist that has quite an intensive international career. She also lives and works between Berlin and Tel Aviv, and she has quite a difficult personal story. Her twin brother, Eli Sasportass, was kidnapped by the Hamas, and she had really a very difficult time. It was, when we talked to her quite a few years ago, it was always mentioned as if really part of her was taken. She had a difficult time. What we see here that looks like a barcode are actually recordings of their family Shabbat dinners. She recorded for the first year after Eli was kidnapped, every dinner, because this was part of the conversation, and the translation of these recordings are creating this bar. But there is more of her personal story here, because her mother was a seamstress, and her drawings that you can see part of it here always look like almost stitches. It looks like an embroidery stitches here of the forest. Her father was a carpenter and used to do kitchen, and she created these compositions of color and materials that relate to her father's work. So again, we see that there is so much of the locality, of the personal story that comes out through the work of the artist and tells the story behind the work. This is also one of the last acquisitions. It's a work by Sharif. He's another Israeli Arab artist that comes from Haifa. He lives currently in LA in the last few years, and just had a big show in Tel Aviv at the Center of Contemporary Art, where I saw this work. I don't know if any of you can recognize the gestures here, but it's actually Arafat and Ehud Barak in Camp David when they were trying to decide who will go in first into the room. And for Sharif, it created almost a comic dance image that he put this music that also reminds us of a cartoon music. This small series of work is made by another young Israeli woman artist. Her name is Alham Rokni. She's actually disabled in a wheelchair, but is incredibly courageous. This was also a series of works that she did, I think, while she was studying at the MFA program in Bezalel. And this is her family story coming from Persia, and it's her grandmother and her mother with her 4 sisters, and this whole combination of versions of this image that she created. Again, her family story, her images very much relate to her young age in Persia and memories of her family. This is a work by Nir Hod, another artist that moved to New York. This is a work from a series that he exhibited in New York about 6-7 years ago. It was called Mothers. He did a series of 15 images of this work in different versions of color. For people who are familiar with the work of Andy Warhol, it actually very much takes from the work called Shades. And for people who know the candles of Gerhard Richter, it's very much influenced by the way the candles are shown in his work. This work comes from a very interesting historical point. That's an image that a lot of us know from the Warsaw Ghetto, with the kid that kind of holds his hands up. The woman standing next to him, which for a long time was a debate whether she was his mother or is she at all related to him, she was the one that intrigued Nir very much, because she very much looks like a fashion icon from the 21st century. almost like wearing Prada clothes. It looks like a Prada bag. But as he tried to learn her image, he actually realized that this bag has an image of a skull reflected in it. There is a skull that her hair creates. Also, when you look at this image, it's like her figure is full of skulls that almost reflects her very future from this point. And it's an image that he was taken by and worked on it for quite a while and created this very impressive series. Nir also has a gallery in Los Angeles right now. This is strong and interesting because of its historical perspective. It was great to have you all to visit our home in Caesarea that we love so much, to see part of our collection. As you can see right now, collection is fun, the art is great, but there is actually nothing that competes with the view here and the fabulous backyard sculpture that Herod built for us. So this is the Caesarea aqueduct. I actually would like to add one more thing. When I started working with the arts in the early 80s, everybody said that Israeli art is not Jewish art. But I believe today that when so many Jews live here in Israel, that everything created in Hebrew related to Jewish traditions or Jewish history, and it doesn't matter if it's secular, it's enough it respects our common values to make it part of the future tradition of the Jewish world.